What feelings do these words conjure up in you? Editing process. Terror? Distress? Dismay? If it's any of the above, don't worry, we are about to dismantle your fears piece by piece and help you find the joy in editing with today's guest.
Hey friend, do you love the smell of books? Maybe you absolutely delight in the sound of a pen gliding across a page as you write. Hi, my name is Shira Rodriguez, and I am a Jesus follower, a writer, entrepreneur, and lover of all things boho and books. In this podcast, I want to take you on a journey of discovering yourself, discovering God and your passions, and how to make your life beautiful and so full that it overflows into the lives of others. And over here, we are not about compartmentalizing life. Oh no. Over here, we talk about holistically taking your life and presenting it as a place where others can be blessed just by knowing you. Are you excited? I am. So snag your favorite mug of tea or a pen and paper and let's jump in. Because you're listening to Her Reading Life podcast.
Hey, lovely listeners, welcome to Her Reading Life podcast. I'm so excited to have you on here today. Oh my goodness, this week has been absolutely nuts. This week and last week has been very interesting for sure. We have been at my house, we've been trying to paint the second floor, and because it just conjures up a lot of dust and brings up a lot of dust when we're moving all the furniture, I have been out of my house for the days that they were actually painting, and it's been so incredibly crazy. Being outside and then coming back home and then having to clean everything. It has been absolutely wild. It's been wonderful because the second floor looks amazing, but it's definitely quite a lot to be cleaning and organizing everything. And yes, everything looks beautiful now, but it does take a lot of work. Actually, this is actually really similar to what happens during the editing process. In our first drafts, we have, whether you're an outliner or a pantser, we all have this moment of thinking how incredible this is and drafting our stories, and we're kind of in our honeymoon stage of our story. And then we come to the editing phase. So think of the drafting phase as when you're buying a house. You're absolutely in love with your house. You are so over the moon that you bought one. And then after a while, you start realizing that there are a lot of things that you have to fix and repair, change. And so you go into repair mode. And that's what the editing process does. Is it uncomfortable? Yes, it can be super uncomfortable. Like I said with the painting, sometimes you kind of have to go to a different place or set your mind at a different place so that you can be able to make those repairs and get everything done. But in the end, your story will turn out so much better than initially it was. I'll be honest, I did not plan that segue, but it is such an apt picture of the editing process. If we focus our minds on the fact that the goal is to make our story better, maybe it makes the process a little bit more tolerable. But today I am so excited because I have a lovely friend with me on the podcast. Her name is Caitlin Miller, and if you've been on Bookstagram for some time, then you've probably heard of her. She's the author of The Memories We Painted and Our Yellow Tape Letters, and I was so thrilled when she accepted my invitation to come onto the podcast. She's going to be talking all about how to prep your novel before bringing it to an editor, because I feel like people don't really talk about this as much. We all know that writers have editors, but how you go from the drafting stage to the editing stage is often not discussed. So that's why I was so excited to bring Caitlin Miller on, not only because she is a wonderful editor, but also a wonderful writer. So I really wanted her to be able to kind of discuss this from the perspective of both a writer and an editor. So without further ado, I'm so excited to bring you into this conversation. So lean in, listen close, and enjoy this conversation with Caitlin Miller. Hey everyone, welcome to her Reading Life podcast. Guys, today I am so excited because I get to have Caitlin Miller with me today in the studio. And for those of you who don't know, Caitlin Miller is the author of Our Yellow Tape Letters and The Memories We Painted. And if you've been on Bookstagram for a while, you've probably seen her books somewhere, and they are so beautiful, and I love them so, so much. And she is also an editor, which is why I was so excited to invite her over to talk to us a little bit about how to get your novel ready for bringing it to an editor, because so many times people don't talk about the work that you have to do before bringing it to an editor so that you can get the most out of your editing. So I am so excited to have her in the studio here with me today. Welcome, Caitlin. It's so wonderful to have you on.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be on the podcast. So yeah, I'm thrilled.
Yay. But honestly, I would love to hear or have my listeners hear a little bit about your story, because I love the beautiful prose that you've been able to bring into your stories and the beautiful hope that you have. But I would love for them to hear a little bit about your story and how you stumbled into this world of like writing books, like Our Yellow Tape Letters and The Memories We Painted, and how it all led you to editing.
Yeah, for sure. Let's see. I remember very clearly it was about like either my 13th or 14th birthday, and I had been gifted a set of books from my grandparents, and I feel like it was the first time that I had like read more like fiction books that were like action packed and exciting, but also had great themes. And I just remember sitting there reading and going, "Oh my gosh, like this is so cool how you can tell a story and just like make it so exciting, but also make it really impactful." And ever since then, I just fell in love with reading. I read a crazy amount of books per year, like way too many probably, but all of that reading just really instilled in me like a passion for writing my own stories, because I would just have ideas come to mind and I would be like, wow, I've never read a story like the idea that I have. I wonder if it would be impactful for someone else to read. Um, so that's kind of how I got into writing, and how it led me to editing was just I would read some books and sometimes they would just miss the mark for me, because I would go, wow, maybe if they had just like changed this a little bit or developed the plot more, I would have really connected with the characters or fallen in love with the story more. Or just even things like grammatical stuff. I'd be like, oh, that's missing a comma, or a comma shouldn't be there. Like if
Yeah.
maybe they had just, got it proofread, or maybe a proofreader missed it. All that stuff, just like the ideas that I have for stories and just like my passion for it, also made me passionate about wanting to help people develop their own stories, and strengthen their writing and everything like that. So yeah, I guess it was that set of books I got for my birthday that kind of just like paved the way for everything else. But yeah.
That's so beautiful. And that's incredible how like little things can impact you so much and like inspire you to do things that you would have never thought. Like,
Yeah.
wow, I think 13-year-old Caitlin probably would have been like, whoa, that's crazy that it just launched me on a whole writing
Oh,
career.
oh yeah, she never saw it coming. So
I love it. And which was your first book? Was it The Memories We Painted?
yeah, that was my first book. I published it in 20, actually both my books came out in 2022. The
Wow.
Memories We Painted was in March, and then Our Yellow Type Letters was in December. The Memories We Painted was definitely, it came from like a really difficult season of life, that I'd been in and my family had been in, specifically my sister, who was diagnosed with like a kind of disease that only 10 people in the world have been diagnosed with before.
Wow.
Um, just a lot of chronic pain, chronic illness. She had surgery. She was in and out of the hospital a lot. And that came with a lot of questions for me about suffering. Like, how can, God, who is all good and all knowing and all powerful, allow this to happen. Like he has the ability to heal her or to, give the doctors answers that can lead to breakthrough solutions for her. So why is he like almost withholding that and allowing her to, suffer for years? It just like I had a lot of questions that I had to wrestle with for a few years, and I finally like reached this point that I could just say and believe that God is still good despite all the bad things that happen. And just because he allows it doesn't mean he's not good. Um, and when I'd reached that place, I felt like God just dropped the story on my heart. I was at a coffee shop. I was just sitting there looking at the window, and the thought of write a book about a girl who has polio and has to live her life in a wheelchair and write about that. And I was like, what wait, was where did that come from? It just felt like so like unexpected, but that whole story was me writing about my journey from point A of struggling to point B to like having that confidence that knowing God is good despite all the suffering that we face. So that was kind of the story behind the story for The Memories We Painted. So it's a very special book to me.
I can imagine. That is so beautiful. That's
Thank you.
incredible. Wow. And it's so beautiful how you've been able to use words just to be able to inspire people and bring hope in ways that I think maybe only stories can do. Yeah. And I love how you also like dug into who you were because I feel like people sometimes don't talk enough about how stories have to come from within who you are, like the deepest part of you, the truest part of you. That is where the really good stories are going to come out of. They're going to come out of that, the wrestling that you've had to do in your life with your own doubts, your own fears, your own things, like your own emotional
Yeah.
struggles. That's what will come onto the page, and we sometimes don't realize that the stuff that we go through in the process is exactly what makes us a great writer or a better writer, at least.
Yeah, no, for sure. And yeah, I'm actually like speaking about that. I recently read a book and it was just talking about grief, and it was like a fictional story, but the theme was about like losing someone close to you. And when I was reading it, I could just tell. I was like, the author has like this is her heart on the page. She has absolutely experienced something hard. And then when I got to the author's notes section of the book, she talked about how she lost her sister and just all the grief that came with that. And I could just tell like the story moved me so much. I was almost in tears just because it was so raw, but also so like real and just so powerful. So yeah, definitely just putting yourself on the pages. It's very vulnerable because some people won't connect with the story, even though you're putting your heart out there. They're like, it just wasn't like I didn't relate to it, but I think just being brave enough to do that can really impact people's lives.
Absolutely. That's so beautiful. And it's so true because, like, we do write fiction, but at the core of it, everything is true. Like, the
Yeah.
reason why stories resonate is because they are true.
Yeah.
So, even I think, like, the writing journey and the process, even of like editing and going over drafts, just makes us stronger as people. So, yes,
Yes.
it is hard, but
Yeah.
when you go through it, you come out on the other side as a better person.
Yes, 100%.
Yeah, I love that. But yeah, so when we're jumping into writing, we know what kind of story we want to tell. We have a heart that is burning with this message that we want to tell. But it can get so confusing because sometimes there are so many phrases thrown haphazardly about. It can be pretty daunting, honestly. Like the
Yeah.
first time that you encounter, like, okay, I need an editor. And they're like, what kind of editing do you want? And you're like, I thought there was only one kind of editing. And
Yeah.
then it can be so confusing. Can you tell us and break down exactly what an editor does, what kinds of editing phases there are, and how they uniquely help you to grow?
Yeah, for sure. I remember when I was getting ready to publish the memoirs we painted, and I was like, okay, I need an editor. And I'm like, what's a developmental editor? What's the difference between like a line editor and a copy editor? And
Yeah.
I had to spend a lot of time researching that. And now that I myself am an editor, like I understand the various roles. But just to kind of hopefully break it down simply, There's usually four like editing stages. The first one would be developmental editing, which is where an editor will sit down and read your full manuscript and really take a look at the plot and are there plot holes? Are there ways to strengthen the plot or character arcs? Like, is there a way to really develop a certain theme or allow a character to grow more? And just all the stuff that comes with like big picture stuff. That's what like a developmental editor will help you with. And I feel like those edits are usually the biggest ones because they'll be like, oh, maybe you should add in a new chapter to help explain like the world building or just to, introduce the character better to readers early on, or delete this or rewrite this, add in this, develop that. So those are like the biggest edits to tackle. And then from there, there's line editing, which is where an editor will look, analyze basically your each sentence word by word. Okay, does this word fit here? Is there a way to add in more descriptions that help like show versus tell what's happening? And just also fixing some grammatical stuff along the way. Um,
Right.
so most of those changes the editor will do for you, but if they suggest adding in new things, then you'll have to do that. But a lot of that is on the editor. And then copy editing. I am not a copy editor because I know that's not my strength. So I'm like, I'm not going to waste anyone's time or money trying to do something that I know I can't do well. But copy editing is basically, a lot of it is like fact checking. For example, if you include like the population of a city, and this is like historical fiction, the copy editor will go and look at that time period and be like, okay, actually, like the population you included was wrong for this city during this time period. It was this, or just a lot of factual stuff, whether it's like medical stuff that you're mentioning, like the copy editor will make sure, okay, that's actually accurate for, this time period and everything like that. So I know that is not my strength, but a lot of people are great at it, so I'll leave it to them. And then the last stage is proofreading. This is like the last time a set of like editor's eyes will be on your manuscript before it goes to print. So they're checking for, all the grammatical stuff. Do you have incorrect punctuation or inconsistent capitalization or spelling of words? So they like do that last comb through of your whole manuscript, make sure it's good to go, and then your book goes to print. So that's kind of an overview of the editing stages and everything like that.
I love that. That is so much clearer than than it can be sometimes because they're like those words just get thrown about so haphazardly that it's like it can be so daunting.
Yeah.
And so many times you're like, okay, how do I know if I need a developmental editor or if I need a copy editor or like what stage? Also, what would you recommend if you like what order would you recommend for people to do it in and which would be like the most essential? If you have to hire like one editor, what would be the most essential that you would recommend?
Yeah. Okay. So as far as order, it was actually in the order that I listed. It would go developmental edits,
Right.
line edits, copywriting, and then proofreading. If you could only afford to get one type of edit, I'm torn because there's two that I think are really essential, but I would say definitely hire a developmental editor because everyone needs one. Even, New York Times bestselling authors have developmental editors because it just is so essential to the structure of the story. It's big picture stuff versus people might be willing to overlook maybe proofreading errors like, okay, there was like
Right.
a comma there that shouldn't be there. But if you don't have a developmental editor, then like your story will not be as strong or as good as it can be. So definitely a developmental editor. If you can do two, get that and proofreading. So there's no
Right.
like typos or anything like that. But yeah.
I love that. Yes, that makes things so much more practical because yes, it can be quite an investment to have like editors for all the things.
Oh yeah.
But yes, strengthening your story will make things so much easier on even the proofreading because some people might not even notice, but they will definitely notice if your story is sagging in parts or could have used a
Yeah.
little bit of work.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Especially if it's like your first novel or if you're indie publishing, it can be so helpful to get another set and pair of eyes on your manuscript.
Yeah, absolutely. As an indie author myself, I'm like, yeah, it's really good to have another set of eyes. So.
Exactly. Yes. Hey there, listeners. Before we dive back into today's episode, I want to take a quick moment to talk about something really important. Reviews are the lifeblood of any podcast. They not only let us know what you're loving about the show, but also help others discover the beauty of living, giving, and repeating. So, if you're enjoying the content we're putting out, here's a small favor I'd love to ask. Could you take just a minute or two to leave us a review on your favorite podcast platform? Whether it's Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or any other platform you listen on, your reviews make a world of difference. By leaving a review, you're not just sharing your thoughts with us, but you're also helping us climb the charts and reach more listeners who might benefit from our discussions. Plus, it's a wonderful way to show your support for the content you love. So, friends, if you're finding value, inspiration, or even just a good laugh in any of these episodes, please consider dropping a review. It only takes a moment, but it means the world to us. And hey, if you want to go the extra mile, share the podcast with your friends, family, or anyone you think would benefit from these conversations. Together, we can create a community of listeners who are engaged, inspired, and ready to take on the world. All right, that's enough from me. Let's get back to the show. Thanks for being the wonderful, lovely, incredible listeners you are. And as always, enjoy the episode. Something I find honestly so beautiful about your style of editing and writing is that you have the best of both worlds, which is amazing. As an editor, you're able to understand what it's like to be a writer. And as a writer, you have an eye for detail because you're also an editor, which makes your prose just so rich and beautiful. And I love that about it. You're writing so much. So, as someone who wears both caps, how do you personally prep or self edit your novel before you send it to a professional editor? And is this necessary for most writers to learn, like just to prep their novel?
Yeah, I definitely would say prep your novel. The reason for that is something I try to do with my own books is I treat it almost as if I'm the editor. So I look at it as, okay, what are the weaknesses in the story? What are the strengths? How can I improve it? Where like inconsistencies or weak points in the plot that don't make sense? Because
Right.
I want to like, as the author, I understand the story better than the editor will. So I really want to like give it my all and then send it off to an editor who will notice things I didn't, and have ideas. But yeah, it's really helpful to do that just because it also helps you become a better writer. Because if you're able to notice not just like, oh, I love this part of my book, but also the flaws in your book, each book you write will only get better because you're noticing those things and you're able to fix it. Um, so yeah, that is something that like I definitely always try to do with my books is look at it with an editor's set of eyes as best as I can because sometimes I'm biased and I'm like, well, I don't think that's an issue, but then the editor's like, you need to fix that. I'm like, okay, but
I know. Absolutely. And what's something that you try to do? Because, like, after, for example, your first draft, especially the messy first draft, how do you kind of detach yourself so that you can see with your editor's eyes? What are some things that you like to do to kind of be able to see it more objectively?
yeah. Well, one thing I do is, well, I try to do this. I'm not always good about it, but I like to just take a break from it, even if it's just like a week. Just, I feel like if I'm in the story so much, I don't see what's wrong with it because I'm just so used to reading everything. If I take a break from it and come back at it with a fresh set of eyes, I feel like I see it more objectively, or like don't have as like a close up of a view. I'm more like farther out and I can notice things that are wrong with it. I actually just did that with my third book that I'm working on. Like I took a break from it, I came back to it, and I was like, oh, okay, there are still some things wrong with the story that I need to fix, but I'd never noticed it before because I was just reading it over and over and over. I'm like, well, it should be fine. Nothing's standing out to me. But when you take a break,
Right.
something will probably stand out to you when you come back to it. So,
Absolutely. So yeah, so things that you like to do is like just looking at the story structure and I bet the character arcs too, probably.
yeah, because sometimes, like, with the book I'm writing right now, actually, first draft, there was a character. I can't say too much about it because, like, it's still under wraps for now, but I realized that his character, like, was in the story, but he did not have, like, his own character arc, and, like, I loved his character, but then I took a step back and I was like, "Wait, like, what lesson is he learning for himself?" Like, he's there helping as the main character learns her lesson, but what is he learning? Like, what is his purpose? And so the second draft, I could, like, change so much, and then I sent it off to beta readers, and they were like, "Oh my gosh, I love this about his character," and I was like, "That was not in the first draft." Like, he was nothing like that. He's totally developed since then. So, yeah, I feel
Right.
like, especially for me, character arcs really develop the second time round, because I pay a lot more attention to
Absolutely.
those details.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I love that. And yeah, it can be kind of hard sometimes to like see those mistakes in your draft, but when you do catch them, it's so much better because you're able to refine them maybe even better sometimes than
Yeah,
when the editor catches them because you're able to see, "Oh, okay. I see where what I was trying to do and I didn't quite get there. Let's see how we fix this and how we make this even better."
yeah, no, exactly. Like I said earlier, you know the story better than the editor ever will. So like, you will probably catch things that they won't because like it's your story, not theirs. So while they can help, like you also need to pay attention to those things because sometimes only you can catch them.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's why I think it's so essential for like writers, even if they don't want to be editors, to learn how to at least the basics of like self-editing yourself because the editor is
Yeah,
not going to do it all.
yeah, you have to pull your weight and do your part. So.
Exactly. Exactly. And speaking of that, how do you know when something just doesn't work in your story and like develop that, I guess, that gut sense? Because it's kind of more of a gut sense. And while you're in the drafting stage, so whether it's a subplot or a sentence, what are some tips and tricks you've found for quickly troubleshooting story problems before they get out of hand or require rewrites?
Yeah, so something that I've noticed for myself if like I'm in the drafting stage and something just isn't sitting quite right, usually for me it's like a plot thread. Um, I will I notice that like when there's actually something wrong with it, I try to convince myself that it's fine. I'm like, "Oh, I think it's strong enough. I think it's good enough." But when I have to try to convince myself of that, I know I need to work on it because other times when it's something that I'm like really I know it's gonna work, I don't have to convince myself. I'm just like, oh, I'm certain, like I nailed this to like I did this like as well as it needs to be done. But if you're just sitting there going, well, I think it's good enough, hopefully people won't notice or maybe they won't point it out. That's usually when you need to work on it. And the sooner you tackle that, especially if you're still like early on in the story, the better because it can affect the trajectory of the whole book. And if you avoid it, sometimes people have to start from ground zero, start from scratch and start completely over because so many things got out of hand that the story just became a mess and they couldn't even figure out what was right, what was wrong about it. So just tackle that early on. And if you're trying to convince yourself that something works, maybe realize that it doesn't and try to brainstorm ways to improve it. So,
Exactly. Yeah. Because honestly, if you don't believe it, your reader is not gonna believe it. You can bet your bottom dollar your reader's not gonna buy it if you're not buying it.
oh yeah, 100%. So you want to be certain of it for yourself.
Exactly, yeah. But I love that you mentioned that it is kind of like a thing you kind of have to, like, grow aware of it, and it
Yeah,
does get better with time. You're kind of able to see, "Oh, this is an idea that's gonna work. Oh, this is not gonna work." Even I think in a way, even, like, your sentences when they feel there's a certain thing that you're like, "Okay, this sentence goes this sentence, it's, like, extra." Or things like that, even on a like, I guess on a micro level, in your story, it's a lot about just creating a story that fits together and that when you read it, you're like, "Okay, yes, this fits."
yeah, totally. And I sometimes think it's harder for authors to delete sentences than like reworking a plot theme because it's their
Yes.
word count. They're trying to reach that word count goal, and deleting words feels like a step back. I am like that. I do that too. I'm like, wow, I just reached like an all new high word count. I do not want to like, go back and delete 1,000 words, that are unnecessary. But actually, as I've been working on edits for my book right now, I've been coming across some sentences. I'm like, oh, I really like how I worded that, or I like the sentence, but within the context, I'm like, I'm not sure if it fits here. Like,
Right.
so maybe I'll try to move it somewhere else, or I'm not sure if it fits for this story. So I delete it from the manuscript, but I save it to another document of random lines that I have to incorporate in future books. That way I'm not like getting rid of it forever. But yeah, just if it's unnecessary, like it's just gonna have the story drag on, and like readers are gonna be like, well, it's nice prose, but like what purpose is it serving for the story? So
Exactly.
it's hard to delete it. I really struggle with that, but it's for the best, honestly. So
I know, and it can be so hard. You just remove it, and they're like, "That was my favorite sentence," or something like that, and it's pretty,
yeah,
but maybe it's out of place, and,
yeah,
like, especially, like, in an action scene, you're like, "Wow, I described something so beautifully," and then you're like the editor's like, I don't think this fits," and you're like, "But it's so like, it's don't you see the aesthetic of it?"
yeah. Like, this girl's describing the color of this guy's eyes, how dreamy they are. It's like probably not the best time to do that while they're fighting, running away from an enemy or something.
Exactly.
But it just sounded pretty, but like, yeah.
Exactly. That's a really good idea though to paste it like on a different document for lines because you never know, they might inspire like a different story even.
Yeah, no, seriously, yeah, don't delete it. Like if you like how it sounds but it doesn't fit the story, save it because you can use it in another story. Um, that's what I do. So
I love that so much. Hey friends, did you enjoy that? I absolutely loved listening to Caitlin and just being able to listen to her wonderful advice when it comes to editing and the editing process and things to look out for even in your own novel before you have to go to the second draft or the third draft or even the revision stage. I hope that this was incredibly helpful for you, and tune in next time as Caitlin talks about how she got into the editing world and how you too can enter the editing world if this is something that you would like to be involved in. Thank you so, so much for listening to this episode, and once again, until next time, continue to live, give, and repeat. And I'll see you next week.
Yay! You did it! I'm giving you a lovely big virtual hug because you just finished another episode of Her Reading Life podcast. If you'd like to access all the wonderful links I mentioned in this episode, visit my website at bio.site/Shira J. Rodriguez. That's bio.site/Shira J. Rodriguez. There, you can access my blog posts, resources, and so much more. Also, check out my Instagram page for more inspirational content. And join my email list for insider secrets and exclusive updates on special events. The links are in the description box below. Also, if you could take a minute and leave a review for this podcast, that would be amazing. We're able to reach so many more people because of your reviews and ratings. I can't wait to chat with you next time, friends. Keep living, giving, and repeating.